Hey, welcome everyone. I'm happy for yet another episode. The topic for today is unpacking navigating executive decision making in uncertainty. This is a really hot topic, and a lot of times people don't discuss about this topic. I have a special guest with me. I will let him introduce in a moment. We are diving into something every leader focuses, but it doesn't always talk about it openly. Making decision in times of uncertainty, and when the stakes are high and the path is not clear, that is often when the leadership is tested the most. So today we are going to explore that, how leaders balance data and intuition, how they stay calm under pressure, and how they communicate decisions even when the answers are not black and white, right? My hope is that through these stories and reflections, we will uncover not just strategies, but the human side of leadership in certain times. I have a special guest with me to talk about this topic, which is none other than Paul. I want you to introduce yourself, and then we can dive into this topic.
Super. Thank you, Anand. Good to be with you today, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. This is an interesting topic. I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts. My name is Paul Kennedy. I'm the president and CEO of DSG. We are a distributor of electrical, plumbing, and HVAC equipment in the upper Midwest, headquartered in Minneapolis, 63 locations across the upper Midwest, about 1,100 employees, and we are 100% employee-owned.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Probably I'll start with something which is really hard. I think about this all the time. When things are not clear, every decision feels heavier because you're not just choosing the right path. You always have this doubt about, am I on the right path? Am I on the wrong path? And that gets complex when you are in a leadership role because, I always feel like leadership gives you a lot of loneliness, right? When you go up in your career, you're also carrying the weight of people's trust and expectations. So I want to start with, what is some of the moment or one moment when you had to make a decision in real uncertainty, and how that tested both your resilience and your leadership style?
Yeah, great question. And I guess as I think about one of those times, I think it was the early days of COVID. It was really an uncertain time. We had no idea what was going to happen. We had this pandemic, which was, I don't think we actually knew how widespread it was, but we knew very quickly that our business was being impacted, and we needed to adapt. So one was understanding, hey, what is the potential impact, and do a little bit of scenario planning around that. But also we had to make some decisions early on, particularly around protect our people and make sure they were safe, but also how to surgically take some expense out of the business, which, unfortunately, sometimes revolves around people. So we didn't have all the data. We didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew we needed to do something, and we could take a little bit of an incremental approach. So we started with, making some tough decisions around people. And then Rav took a step back and said, okay, well, let's see what happens. So that was one time, didn't have a clear picture on what the future was going to hold, but we had to take action.
Well, I think that's a powerful moment. Nobody would have expected that kind of a pandemic for sure. I think that's a powerful moment. And it makes me think about how leaders weigh what they know against what they feel, right? And there's always uncertainty. Thanks for sharing that, Paul. When you talk about this uncertainty, the truth is leaders almost never have all the data they want. Sometimes the information is incomplete or it comes too late. And in those moments, I'm sure, you have a lot of experience. Leaning in on the experience, leaning in on this gut instinct can feel both necessary and risky as well at the same time. I'm curious, this is the question I've been asking almost all the leaders. How do you personally decide when to trust the data that you have and when to lean in on your intuition or the gut feeling?
Well, it's, you're never going to have a complete data set, or at least that's my opinion. You're just never. So data's got to be one input into your decision-making process. And if you only relied, or your decision-making process was all about, hey, I'm only going to rely on data, then anybody could do my job, right? So I think experience, intuition, your gut, and then surrounding yourself with people that are comfortable, offering input and offering insights from their perspective as well. So making sure that you surround yourself with a group of leaders that are willing to challenge when that's appropriate, offer their opinion, and and not that you're driving a consensus decision on everything, but there are other data points that you can gather from their experiences, which may be different from yours.
Right, but I think that's well said. I imagine part of that balance is also about timing, when to pause, when to push ahead, when do you use data, when do you use your intuition, right? As in, there's always a balancing act that we can all implement. But there's a constant pressure pressure on leaders to act, right? Whether you have data or not, whether you are using the gut instinct or not, you have to act quickly. Team wants clarity. They're looking up to you, up to the leaders to get clarity. Boards want action immediately. Markets don't wait. But rushing into an action can lead into blind spots. I'm curious, how do you balance this urgency of making something really, really quickly with the discipline of taking a step back to reflect before deciding? This is the balancing act that I'm talking about. I'm sure you might have gone through multiple scenarios like that, but I want you to share whatever you can share for the audience here, Paul.
Yeah. So as I think about that, the uncertainty, and I think there's a ratio between the amount of information you have and the urgency in which you can make that decision. So, hey, if it's a lower risk decision and you maybe don't have as much information, but it's low risk and you have a level of confidence that you can make it, I think you can act very much more quickly. As you have more data, as the decision becomes more impactful to a broader cohort of the organization, you need a little more data and a little more input and reflection in making that decision. But you can also suffer from having waiting for all the data or too much data to push you over the top, or you become paralyzed that you can't make a decision because you feel like you don't have enough input. So at that point, I think you got to lean on your intuition, you got to lean on your experience, lean on the team around you, and push forward. Because ultimately, your team and your organization is looking at you to make the decision. And the hope is that you've garnered trust and you've built trust over time. And whatever decision you make, they're going to follow you. So that I think it's really important to understand the weight and the responsibility of your entire company is looking at you as the CEO to ultimately make a decision, chart a course, get the input, but ultimately you've got to make the call.
I think that connects to another challenge I experience, and I'm sure every leaders in the industry experience also. It's nothing about none other than the volume of decisions that the leaders have to make and face every day. Sometimes it is giving the decision fatigue, right? It is real. At the executive level, you're making dozens of decisions, whether it's small or big. Like you said, teams are always looking up to you as a CEO to make the tough calls. I think the cumulative weight of that can be exhausting, right? How much brain power you need to have to process those, whether it is small or big. There's always a mental strain, if you will, right? Of repeated high-stake decisions that you want to make. You have to process a lot of those things. What helps you, Paul, to keep yourself sharp in those moments where you need to make those judgment? I'm sure you might have felt tired, but how do you keep your momentum up so that you don't feel tired?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things there. I think making sure that you are focused on the right decisions and that you delegate the decisions that ultimately somebody else can make and you don't need to be involved in. So that takes a little bit of the quantity away, right?
Right.
And then I think the other piece of that is it's really important to have a strong personal foundation relative to your own health and that you're committed to your personal well-being and ensuring that you're getting the exercise you need and sleep and eating right, because there's nothing worse than having that stress that you're describing in this decision-making fatigue and then compounding that with not having a strong personal foundation of your own personal health. The view that you have as you're coming into that, because fatigue sets in more, if you didn't get a good night's sleep or, you're not getting enough energy. I get energy from exercising. So if I don't exercise, I feel it at the end of the day, just from the standpoint of, boy, I need to move.
I think that is true. Like you need to have your physical activity to have the mental activity, right? Keeping it clear and up to date. But of course, like making a decision is only half of it. The main thing will come into play when you communicate those decisions. Also shapes trust, right? Sometimes you made a decision, but the outcome is still unclear. Or you are steering the ship while the storm has not passed yet, right? Teams look to leaders for confidence in those moments when you have not made those decisions. But I'm curious, like when you make a decision or when you don't make the decisions because you're still working on it, how do you communicate those decision points, right? Whether you made a firm decision or you're still working on it, so that in a way that people can trust, right? That is an important thing, even though you don't have all the answers to it, right? Because often leaders think, okay, I should have all the answers. When people ask questions, I cannot say and I don't know. But saying I don't know is also a courage. I'm curious to know, Paul, I'm sure you might have faced a lot of those moments. I'm curious to know, how do you keep building trust when you don't have all the answers?
I think the first part of that is saying, I don't know a lot. And I say, I don't know a lot. And that we're going to work together as a team to figure out the right answer and then being completely transparent and honest as you're working through that process. So it's funny that you use those words, I don't know. I say that a lot from the standpoint of what I do say is, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out together. Right. And part of it is, I don't know because I haven't experienced it, or part of it may be because the outcome is uncertain and we don't have enough data yet to have a complete understanding. I think if you bring the organization along in that decision-making process, and it's, but being open and honest about that, and just acknowledging uncertainty, economic uncertainty overall. If you can share, hey, here are the things that I'm thinking about as we're managing the business 3 months from now, if that uncertainty, because people feel that uncertainty in the news they watch, or, whatever the case may be, I think the real key there is if you're kind of continuing to bring people along in that process, when they see a decision being made, all of a sudden they say, okay, now I know why you made that decision, or I'm on board because you've been kind of forecasting this through the words and through what you've been telling me and the conversations we've been having, whether it's a company-wide meeting or whatever the case is, as we're bringing people along, and whether we're making a decision to do something or making a decision not to do something, we've kind of set the stage for why we might be making that type of decision.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of trust, we both know that sometimes decisions don't play out as planned. I think every leader, no matter how much experience they have, makes decisions that don't land the way they hoped, right? Sometimes people don't understand. Some people, even though they understand, they pretend that they don't understand. I'm curious to know, I'm going to put you on spot, Paul. You don't need to share it if you don't want to share it, but what is the one decision in your journey that goes planned? And most importantly, how did you recover or pivot from that experience? Because that nobody talks about those, okay, we talk about communicating it, people may not get it, but how do we recover from it?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thought, and one comes to mind, and it was early in my career, but it's one that's still fresh with me. And I'm sure there are, if I gave it some more time, I could probably think of many others that, because, you need to make 51% of the right decisions, right, to win in life. So this was it was a personnel decision that I made in a long time ago, early in my career. And I was moving on from a branch manager in my organization. And I had not given enough to scenario planning around what potential outcomes might be as I terminated this one employee. And what ended up happening was, this was a small location, had 3 people in it, and terminated the manager, and one of the other employees resigned on the spot because he didn't understand what was going on. And it was a terminable offense. I mean, it was an egregious breach, but I had not contemplated, because we figured we could run with 2 people for a little bit of time as we and platoon people in, but to have 2 people leave of a 3-person branch, I had not contemplated that, scenario plan that, and I was left kind of to say, okay, now what? And that is something that today, in making sure that you're scenario planning and thinking about potential outcomes that may not be, there's the highest likelihood outcome that you kind of plan for and work towards, but what are the 2 or 3 other outcomes that might come from this decision that you need to make sure you plan B for?
Right. Yeah, I think those kind of moments often highlight the trade-offs that you need to make as a leaders are forced to make in real time, right? I think those are like in that scenario when an employee is quitting on the spot, right? This is the first time I'm hearing that, right? I think there's a lot of trade-offs that a leader has to make. But when we talk about uncertain times, Paul, it's not about making a choice between a good or bad, because there's no good option, right? It's always about making a choice between imperfect options, right? If not a bad options. And that's a challenging part, right? It's not about good or bad. If it is good or bad, people will always pick the good one, right? Not the bad one. But if it is between the imperfect options, how do you evaluate those competing priorities, right? When none of them feels right, your gut feeling will say, nope, this is not the right thing, but if you have to make a choice, what helps you to move forward with the conviction?
Making the decision not about me and thinking about it in the context of DSG and in my current role, I think about the 1,100 families that are relying on me to make the right decision. And I can usually find some solace in that. While I may have 2 options and neither of them are good, one is better than the other. And just being able to discern which one is better and saying, well, hey, if that's the better option, even though neither of them are great, we need to move forward with that, because not making a decision is not a viable option.
I think, of course, you have to constantly think through this, because the world doesn't stand still. You have to move on and make decisions. The way leaders adapt becomes just as important as the choices themselves. I get that apart. Probably I want to pivot into when I talked about when you go up in your career, you will feel loneliness, right? Because the leadership, or you don't have anyone to look look up to make the decisions. And on the reality side, when the leaders stay calm, right, it sets the tone for everyone else. But staying calm in chaos is easier said than done, right? It is not easy. You talked about doing physical activity, physical exercise, and practices and habits that you can bring on. But what makes you grounded, Paul, under the pressure? Because that's a hard thing to do, right? When you're in uncertain times and when you're under pressure, what makes you staying grounded?
So, I mean, a couple of things. I think back to the physical, just, making sure that you're, taking care of yourself, physically, but also mentally.
Yeah.
Part of my kind of daily routine is listening to the Calm app in the morning, doing a 15-minute listen on the Calm app, which is kind of a meditation app, but it, brings a level of Zen to me that maybe I wouldn't get otherwise. And so, I think that's one way. I think the other way is having a level of confidence and humility. You have this awesome responsibility, and you have a whole bunch of people looking at you to make the decision. And that's part of that awesome responsibility.
Right.
And they expect, they're looking at you to see how you're reacting in this situation, because that's going to lead to how they react to a decision or to the situation. And that's part of leadership, is, leading through the storm and not letting the storm get the best of you, and maintaining a level of, calm, to provide a level of assurance to the rest of the organization that, hey, we've got this. We've got leadership that's in place, that's steering us through this, and we should be calm too.
Yeah, I think looking back, I'm curious how those experiences, the tough calls that you made, the grounding practices, staying grounded, shaped your perspective over time. Paul, I know you have wealth of knowledge and wisdom of experience. Anything that you can share, even just one lesson or one characteristics that you think, all leaders should probably start looking at it right away, which will help them, shape them in those uncertainty and uncertain times?
I think it's not only uncertain times, but just leadership in general is curiosity, and being intensely curious about everything, because you learn so much. And I think it'll help you in your decision-making process. It'll teach you to ask better questions, ask more questions. And it's an opportunity to, let down your guard and create an environment where there's an appreciation for other people's input and other people's thoughts. So I think just being curious, I think, is a key tenet that has served me well in making decisions, any decision, but also in leadership and making decisions in uncertain times as well.
Yeah, I think I was just processing the things that we went through. We talked about a lot of things, but this conversation is reminding me that the leadership is not about having perfect clarity or making flawless calls, right? I think there's always going to be imperfections, but it's more than imperfections. It's about resilience. It's about adaptability. It's about being honest in the moments that matters most. Paul, I know you are a busy guy and you have a lot of experience. I can go on and on, but I want to be respectful of your time. And thank you so much for being part of the show. I'm grateful to have you as part of the show. Thank you so much, Paul.
Absolutely, Alan. My pleasure to join you and talk a little bit about leadership in my journey.
Thank you.